Tell me your story of when you were in broadcasting.
Well, I knew that I wanted to go into broadcasting since I was a kid. I had a teacher in the 7th grade, Mrs. McAdams. I even remember her name. And she told me one time, she had us, excuse me, that's ironic considering I just had to clear my throat, but she had us read aloud one time, and she said, you have a nice voice. You should consider doing radio broadcasting or something like that. That never even occurred to me, but when I was a kid, there was this TV show on called WKRP in Cincinnati. It was like a sitcom, and I loved it. And I was like, wait, I could actually be in broadcasting? That had never occurred to me. And so once that idea was planted, that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into radio broadcasting. And there was a radio station. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally, and there's a radio station there, KMOX. It's still there. It's 50,000 watts, clear channel watts, AM. It broadcasts across 44 states at night. I would listen to them late at night, and I just loved the idea. There was this guy, Jim White, who was a radio broadcaster. He was a talk show host, and he would be on I think his shift was like 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. I would listen to him really late at night. I would stay up late and listen to the radio under my pillow. And it just seemed like the most amazing thing. This guy sitting in this studio talking to people across the country, just conversing with them. I thought that sounded like the coolest thing. So
nice.
I started to pursue it. I went to school. I bounced around a couple of different schools, but I went to Butler University for radio broadcasting. Then I went to the University of Missouri and communications there. I still bounced around a few more places. And ultimately, then in my early 20s, I had a friend who hooked me up with an internship at the All Sports station. In St. Louis, there was a brand new All Sports station, also strangely enough still there, KFNS AM 590. And this is about 1993. He hooked me up with an internship. So I started the work. I started that internship, and I was working for free basically. But I worked really hard. I loved the work. I was answering phones and booking guests on programs and doing whatever they needed me to do. And I would just sort of be there from morning to night. And impressed them enough that they hired me on as a board op, which is the person who kind of pushed the buttons, fired off the commercials and all that stuff. And then eventually they hired me on as a producer. And from there I got hired at a sports radio network in Las Vegas, worked there for a couple of years, then got hired at what is now CBSSports.com in Florida to move down here. So I ended up working in actual professional broadcasting and radio for about 7 years, and then in 2001, God sort of redirected me into ministry, which is where I am now. Still in broadcasting. We broadcast a couple of television programs. But things changed, and I ended up more behind the scenes and doing television, Christian television in 2001.
Okay, awesome. So what did you really like most about broadcasting, and what really got you into? Why did you want to do it so badly?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that radio program that I used to listen to, Jim White, in the middle of the night. There was just this sort of romance about a guy, and I just imagine this. I don't know what it was actually like in there, but I imagine a guy sitting behind a microphone in this sort of dimly lit studio. Back then, maybe smoking a cigarette. Back then, everybody smoked cigarettes. It's terrible for you.
Right.
But back then, so I imagine this guy with sort of like rolled up sleeves at a table with a dim light on in the middle of the night, just opening up the microphone and talking in a way that's interesting and compelling. And he would take phone calls, but it wasn't. Now all the radio talk shows are all political.
Right.
This was a non-political show. People would call in to talk about all sorts of things. What happened to their dog, what they made for dinner, and somehow this guy would make it interesting. And I fell in love with the idea of sitting behind a microphone and being able to talk to thousands of people, but speaking to them as if you're speaking one-on-one, and to. I have a sense of humor. I like to be funny. I like to, I'm interested in lots of different things. And the idea of just talking with people about all sorts of different things fascinated me. Interestingly, I didn't really ever end up getting to do that. I went to sports. We talked about sports, and then in Christian television now we have some particular focuses. So I don't have conversations with strangers about what they had for dinner that night. But that was really what sparked my interest, was listening to the radio and hearing, hey, this guy makes a living sitting behind a microphone just talking to people for 5 hours. I love that idea.
Nice. Do you have a particular game that you broadcasted that you really were like, it was just an awesome game? Like,
yeah, that's a fair question. And what the thing was, I didn't actually do much of what we call play-by-play broadcasting.
Okay, yeah.
I did a little bit,
right?
Enough to discover I was terrible at it. The thing about play-by-play broadcasting is you've got to be able to speak quickly and without thinking almost.
Right.
I did a little bit of baseball and could adequately, just passingly do baseball because it doesn't move so quickly. In college, they had us sit down and call a basketball game. This was at Butler University, and at that time, Butler was about a 500 team. They were nothing. Interestingly, about 20 years later, they ended up 2 years in a row going to the national championship game. But back then, you'd have 500 people at most in the Hinkle Arena there. So we could just sit right there courtside without even having press passes, bring a tape recorder, and record the game. Basketball is a very fast-moving game.
Yeah.
You got to keep track of 10 people on the floor, where the ball's at, and so he dribbles on the outside, top of the key, passes out. I was completely lost 10 seconds into it. So I realized I wasn't much of a play-by-play guy. I did do some high school baseball when I was at KFNS in St. Louis. But what I did get to do was cover baseball. In other words, we did a post-game show, and baseball happens to be my sport. I'm from St. Louis. If you're from St. Louis, you are a baseball fan. When I went to work at KFNS, I got to cover the Cardinals and do a post-game show, a Cardinals post-game baseball show. So I got to go to the games, I got to watch the games, take notes, and then go down to the locker room afterwards and ask questions. Joe Torre was the manager at the time. He's in the Hall of Fame now. Ozzie Smith played shortstop with them. He's a Hall of Famer now. And go down and interview these guys after the game and then do analysis and take phone calls about the game afterward. So during that time, the Cardinals weren't very good. But there were a couple of games that ended in walk-off home runs that were really exciting.
Nice.
A pitcher named Mike Morgan came within, I think, 2 outs of pitching a no-hitter one night when I was there. I've never seen a no-hitter in person. I've been to hundreds of baseball games.
Right.
And he was so close, and that was still that was an exciting game. Charlie Huff was about a 45-year-old pitcher for the Marlins at the time, came down and pitched a game against the Cardinals, and threw, I think, a shutout, had a really amazing game at 45 years old. You go down and interview him, forgive me, Charlie Huff, but, he's old, he's fat, and standing there smoking a cigarette, but it was really exciting, and probably the most compelling one, though, was when I was working at CBS. In 1998, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were chasing the home run record. Roger Maris's single-season home run record, which was 61 home runs at the time.
Right.
Turns out everybody was all juiced up on steroids. We didn't really know that at the time. It hadn't become an issue yet. Mark McGwire came down to Florida to play the Marlins along with the Cardinals and broke the National League home run record in a doubleheader while he was playing here for actually 2 games in a row. So he hit 2 home runs 2 games in a row, and I was at one of the games when he broke the National League home run record that Hack Wilson held. And so I got to interview him after the game along with a bunch of other reporters. Being at that game was probably the most exciting one that I covered when Mark McGwire broke the National League home run record.
All right. And then how did you use your platform as a sports broadcaster to... Were you a Christian at the time? Or?
Well, that's interesting. That's probably part of the reason why I'm not in sports broadcasting anymore.
Yeah.
I was not a Christian when I began my sportscasting career.
Okay.
I had married my wife at the time, who's unfortunately passed away 3 years ago. But when we got married, she was a Christian, a new young Christian, and I was not yet a Christian. she shouldn't have married me. If she had gotten better pastoral advice, they would have said, you can't marry him, he's not a Christian.
Yeah.
But she didn't have good pastoral advice, thankfully. God works all things together for good. So she married me, and so it was a long period of time, though, where I would go to church with her. I was interested, but I would say we were married in February of 1992, and I would say it was probably in 1996 or so before I was saved. And I don't have an exact date because it was a process where I started to more and more believe it until I realized I really believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that he's the Lord, that he's Savior. I wasn't a Christian all that time. Then I went through a struggle for a while. How do I live my life as a Christian while being this talk show host on the air? And frankly, there was a pull towards an incentive for being off color, joking about things that I became increasingly uncomfortable joking about. Sports talk tends to be locker room talk, and so it wasn't outright filthy, but there was sort of this pull towards bathroom humor, towards sexual humor, and I felt increasingly uncomfortable with it. So to make a long answer hopefully shorter, I never really did quite figure out in sports radio how to bring my Christian persona into that. And I prayed to the Lord at a certain point, Lord, I don't feel like sports talk is necessarily the path that you have for me now. And he arranged it so that I lost that job. He closed that door for me. CBSSports.com decided we're no longer going to be in the radio business. They shut it down, and I lost that job. It wasn't just me, it was the whole radio department, but they shut it down. So that was sort of, I was forced to take a turn there. And I see that as God's grace with me, because I'm not sure I would have found my way. And I was becoming less and less comfortable with things that I was saying and things that I was sort of feeling drawn to say that didn't necessarily, then I would say something and I'd make a joke, and then later in my heart I'd feel like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, Lord. I'm having trouble pulling myself into a more Christian mindset when I do this program, and so he took me out of it.
So as a Christian, would you ever recommend anyone to go into sports broadcasting, or?
That's a really good question, Zach. I would say there's two issues there as a Christian and in sports broadcasting. It's a very difficult profession, no matter what your beliefs are. It's just, and that's because the radio business has become much more divided up since I was in radio even 25, almost 30 years ago. Since then, the internet has taken over. The economics in that business have completely changed, and so what you have is a few companies that own all the programs and all the radio stations. So there are just very few jobs, and it's always been, even under the best of circumstances, difficult to get paid well in that profession and to stay in one place for a long time. Typically, I moved 3 times, and that's low. I got out of the business before I moved any more times, but I would have had to move a 4th time in order to stay in that business, and that was just in a 6-year or 7-year period. So it's a difficult business. It would be hard to recommend anybody going into that business unless they really felt, this is just my calling. The next Bob Costas is not going to be stopped. If God has gifted someone and called them to that, then I'd say go for it. It is a particularly difficult area then, on top of that, I think, for a Christian. In sports radio particularly, if you look at things, who are the advertisers? Well, who's the audience? The audience for sports radio is men. It's predominantly men between 25 and 50. What do marketers want to sell to men between 25 and 50? They want to sell them booze. They want to sell them strip clubs. They want to sell them, stuff that's supposedly manly that appeals to men. Almost everybody I know that's still in the radio business and the sports radio business has to do ads for, remote broadcasts from strip clubs and things like that. So it would be very difficult to take your moral stand, this is who I am, and this is what I'm willing to do, and this is what I'm not willing to do, and be in that business. That said, I don't think it's impossible. If you're talented enough, they will work around it. If they have somebody that's compelling, they say, this is good radio, this is good ratings, and even though he won't do these things, he's a compelling performer, they'll do it. An example of that, I think, would be a guy, and he's not a Christian, but a guy like Dan Lebitard on the radio today. He is good enough at what he does that he gets to decide what he wants to do. He will not, for instance, do commercials of any kind. He just made a deal with himself that when he went into that business, I'm not going to do commercials. I'm not going to do ads. That's a huge part of the radio business. Salespeople want to be able to sell an ad and say, we're going to have the host do that ad live on the air, live reads, live commercials are big money in that business. We're going to give that to, well, he doesn't do it. His co-host does it. He says, I'm not going to do it. The reason he gets away with that is because he's incredibly good and he draws a huge audience. So it's possible to uphold your standards, to say these are my lines that I'm not going to cross in that business, but I can't lie, it's also very, very difficult.
Okay. And then finally, what have you learned from broadcasting that you can apply to life today? Like,
that's a good question. There are some negative lessons, and I don't want to only focus on those, but what I learned, the radio business is unusually competitive, even compared to most businesses, and I got a real lesson when I was in that business for the first 5 or 6 years in secular radio, a real lesson in human nature and the reality of the sinful human nature. You have a lot of people that are pursuing stardom, a lot of people are pursuing public acclaim, and they're willing to do a lot of things to a lot of other people in order to get what they want. And so there was a lot of backstabbing, a lot of inability to trust people. You think that someone's your friend, and then you find out they're going into somebody's office and telling falsehoods about you in order to try to get past you in the pecking order and so forth. That happens in other places too, but because of the raw egos involved in the radio business, I found that particularly acute. So I learned some negative lessons about human nature and so forth. I think I also, though, learned some things that apply today. When you're in broadcasting, you have to be able to communicate in a way that speaks to a broad number of people. That's why they call it broadcasting. And you've got to be able to put together a message, whatever it is that you're trying to say, that could be understood by a highly educated person, a person that's not that educated, and you can't only do it by dumbing it down, because just by dumbing it down, you'll turn away the highly educated person.
Right.
You've got to find a way to communicate that speaks to both while also drawing them in. And that is something that I think is a good lesson in life. And it's certainly been good in my Christian broadcasting career since then, that we have to find a way to communicate the message of the gospel in a way that an educated person can understand and relate to, and a way an uneducated person can understand and relate to, and yet without turning one or the other away. Fortunately, with the gospel message, it's compelling on its own, so you just find a way to present it. But being able to communicate with people, you learn very quickly in broadcasting whether your message is getting through, whether it's not, whether your communication is successful or it isn't. And so I think honing that through that process has been really helpful to me.
Is there a way for someone to maybe convey the gospel message through sports, talking about sports on air? Like, you think there's a possible way that you could actually do something like that?
Oh, I do, and I wish I had had the chance to do that, because what is it, without getting too esoteric about it, the gospel story is God's story, and so He sort of wired reality to echo that story in all sorts of ways. Why is it that everybody loves a redemption story? Why
Right.
is it that everybody loves the Rocky story?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's because we're created in the image of God, and there is an echo of the
Mm-hmm.
gospel in there. Even if the people putting it together are unbelievers, and usually
Right.
they are,
Right.
there's an echo there because we love the redemption.
Right.
Here's somebody who's in an impossible conundrum. Here's somebody
Right.
who's down and out. They're destroyed. They can't possibly make it back. And then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly, against all odds, they make it back.
Right.
That's the most compelling thing in sports. That's what
Right.
everybody loves about sports. My greatest sports memory as a Cardinals fan is the Cardinals are down to their final strike in the 2011 World Series. They have one strike left. They are trailing by 2 runs against the Texas Rangers. If Texas gets one more strike, they win the World Series. The Cardinals are 1 strike from dead. And not only do they come back to tie the game twice, in 2 different innings, they come back again down to their last strike. They come back to tie it in extra innings. Then they win the game in the 11th inning and go on to win the next night to win the World Series. They were 1 strike away from death, and they won the World Series.
Wow.
Why is that compelling? That's far more compelling than a team that gets in and blows the other team out 4 straight games.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible, this death and then this resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
I think sports is completely shot through with that. And I don't know that anybody has done a great job of finding those applications and applying them to the gospel on the air. There are some good Christian sports talk show hosts. There's a guy in Chicago, and he was on Moody, and his name is escaping me all of a sudden, but he's a Chicago Christian sports talk host in Chicago, and he's done a terrific show where they interview athletes, they interview Christian athletes and so forth, so it's a very Christian-oriented show. But what I would love to see is somebody who just takes the basic stuff of sports and those redemption narratives that we love, and, subtly, but not so subtly that it doesn't come out, apply the gospel to that, the resurrection, the death and resurrection and redemption. That's really what makes sports great, and I think there's a huge opportunity there for somebody who gets that to run with that angle and communicate the gospel effectively in sports media.
Is there anything else that you like to add? Maybe like either advice or something that you personal that you might want to share? Or...
Sure, and a couple quick things. My advice to anybody who's pursuing that field, who's pursuing broadcast, really any kind of broadcasting, not even sports, but just any broadcasting, pray and talk to people around you and make sure that you're confident that that's what God is calling you to do. Because I had a teacher who told me in college, he told all of us, his instruction was, look, you're going to hear from a lot of people telling you to have something to fall back on. I'm telling you, if you have something to fall back on, you are going to fall back on it, because that's how tough this business is. It's only gotten more difficult in the 30 plus years since he told us that. So I would say, be sure before God that this is what he's calling you to, at least right now, and then be prepared to fail, be prepared to struggle, be prepared to beat your head against the wall for a while. That's just all part of it. That's part of that business. I would say go into that business not looking for glory, not looking for personal glory, not looking for fame. The likelihood is much greater that you'll be somebody behind the scenes, that you'll be somebody involved in it rather than an on-air star. Those people, it's just like the acting profession or anything else. Those people are few and far between. Most of us don't end up there. I didn't end up there. I even got to do a national morning sports talk show. It was carried at stations around the country. And that and a cup, that and a nickel will buy me a cup of coffee right now. Even at that level, it ended, and I'm not a star. People don't walk around asking me for an autograph. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
It's very unlikely. So don't go in it for glory. Go into it because this is what God is calling you to in any broadcast profession.
Okay.
And then be prepared for the difficulty of the people. It draws people who are looking for stardom. People who are looking for stardom will not let you get in their way, and they will sometimes play dirty. Be ready for that, and don't respond in kind. Don't get sucked into that. Just be prepared. I'm going into a difficult profession where the odds of success are not great, and where people will kill each other to get to the top of it, and I'm not going to get dragged into that. I'm going to demonstrate Christian character. I'm going to demonstrate grace. I'm going to demonstrate love, even in this setting.
Okay.
Those would be a couple of things. And I would say, if you're of a divided mind, if there's anything else you're really talented at, take a look at it, because it's a really hard business, and it's getting harder because the economics of it, it's just getting smaller and smaller.
Right.
Radio stations, when I was a kid, like I told you about KMOX, they were local radio around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had local radio going. They had a host who worked the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. shift live on the air. They had a 6 to 10 shift, 10 to 2, 2 to 6, 6 to, evening was sports, but it was 24/7 live local on the air. Now, stations maybe have a local morning show, maybe a local afternoon show, and everything else is gotten from a network. Everything else comes from ESPN. Everything else comes from CBS or Fox Sports. In political talk, everything comes from Salem, or everything comes from Mutual. So there's fewer jobs, fewer openings, and so anybody who goes into it needs to be prepared for a struggle in a difficult field. And I don't say that to be discouraging. I just want people to have their eyes open.
So, I interned at Fox Sports, ESPN, and I would agree. I would say it's very worldly, and it's really hard. It's hard to get into, and it's also very. I feel like it would have been very hard as I was struggling with Fox Sports, strong Christian with ESPN, but like you were saying, I feel like it would be really hard to be a part of.
Yeah.
What would you say to like Christians who are like wanting to be like maybe like in Fox Sports or ESPN or something like that?
Yeah. In addition to the things that I've said about that already, I would add, you do need to make sure that you're anchored when you go in there, because you experienced it, Zach. You're going to be probably the only Christian there.
Right.
And that's true in a lot of secular workplaces, but it's a particularly dog-eat-dog business where you're going to probably be the only Christian there.
Right.
You need to be very well anchored. You need to have a support structure in your family, in your church family, a strong spiritual, not just a foundation, not just a background, but an ongoing, active support structure that you participate in, that helps you and feeds you and encourages you and challenges you, because the tide will just carry your way. You go in there, you're the only Christian. It's kind of exciting. There's these things happening. That you're talking with. I mean, I worked with Pete Rose for a couple of years. Like, here's Pete Rose. There's celebrities. It's exciting. And it's so easy to get pulled into that and compromise and to just go along to get along, to keep your mouth shut, it's just one strip club remote. It's just what my job requires. It's so easy to get pulled that way, that unless you have ongoing active connection with other Christians who can help you maintain your foundation, you will drift. And so that's what I would say, making sure that you have a solid spiritual support structure that includes other people and a church when you go into that, because otherwise you'll just get swept away.
All right. Well, I think that's it. But
awesome.
So thanks for sharing and
my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And again, I don't want to discourage you or anybody. It's just a tough business, and I've learned that. And yet, I'm still in broadcasting. I'm still in Christian broadcasting. I work on the television side, which is a little bit less. And again, in ministry, it's not cutthroat.
Right.
And I've been there for 18 years, so that's an incredible blessing. So there are places that you can end up out there, but it's just difficult. And going in with your eyes open will better able you to withstand that if that's what God's calling you to.
All right. Well, okay. So have you? Well, I might have a follow-up.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Because